Ohio. I'm Wilson. No. Okay.
No.
Ohio gozaimasu.
I'm Wilson Lai.
I'm Benjamin. Yeah.
I'm Eli Sands.
You're listening to Deep Cut. Like, none of that bullshit. Okay.
No jokes.
On Deep Cut, we compare a director's most popular film with a personal favorite chosen by one of us.
We also discuss that director's life and career to bring in context that helps us view their movies as they may want us to.
So on this episode, we are continuing our discussion on the Japanese auteur Juzo Itami. Last week, we talked about his iconic, inspirational, infamous Tampopo.
Hunger-inducing.
Delicious.
Food. And today, we are tangentially linked because we are talking about a movie which is also sort of about food. And it brings me so much joy to bring to the table today Itami's 1996 work, Supermarket Woman. And my reason for picking Supermarket Woman as a deep cut pick is I do believe that Tampopo stands on its own in Itami's filmography as the most popular film of his. And then all the other movies of his, at least in the international sphere, are sort of deep cuts. And I just wanted to pick the one that I think we all would have the most fun talking about. And okay. I just wanted, I just wanted you guys to have a fun time watching a movie. And I think
I appreciate that.
Out of all the other Itami films that I've seen, Supermarket Woman was, I think, the strongest, like cohesively as a whole, with all the narrative and stylistic elements. I think it's the strongest of his other films, and I think it is a good indicator of a lot of the other films in his filmography where he worked closely with Nobuko Miyamoto and his the larger cast that he likes to work with, and I guess also a more straightforward narrative than Tampopo. So just a little bit of background on Supermarket Woman. Supermarket Woman was released in 1996. It premiered at the Seattle Film Festival and later on opened in Japan. It was Itami's second last feature, his last feature being Woman in Witness Protection, before his tragic death, which I said I would talk about in this episode. In 1997, on December 20th, Itami died after falling from the roof of his office building, and on his death, there was like a suicide note stating that he was falsely accused of an affair and apologized to his wife. Her photo was on his computer screen, and I think a few days after his death, a tabloid magazine released photos of him in his alleged affair. There has been a lot of debate as to whether or not he committed suicide or there was some sort of interference from Yakuza. Definitely, because
it feels like a definitely.
It feels like a definitely, especially considering a previous film that he made called Mimbo, the Gentle Art of Japanese Extortion, which talks about this hotel in which they're trying to get the Yakuza out. So the different strategies that they use, and I think the release of that movie struck a chord with the Yakuza, and there was threatening going on, and there was physical harm done to Itami. I think they slashed his face, so he had a very visible scar after the release of that movie. And the subsequent movies that he made afterwards were not as didn't really tried not to venture into that territory, but I think the the one that he was making after Woman in Witness Protection, which is the last feature that he made, was going to be a direct call out of the Yakuza gang that attacked him. And these are all like alleged sources and alleged things that happened. But I feel like from the information that I've read, and also the films themselves, like I think he was unafraid of trying to like critique larger systems and like larger forces. And I think it might have backfired. And the sad thing is, like, so much of the things that he made movies about, the things that he wanted to satirize, eventually became true. Like, Women in Witness Protection is about, like, Nobuko Miyamoto plays like this really fancy actress who's sort of like a diva, and she becomes the witness of a murder and then is placed under witness protection. And after Itami's death, Miyamoto herself was placed in witness protection for like a lot of years.
Yes, I read it was like 20
safety.
Years.
Yeah.
Whoa.
Like 20 years.
It's crazy.
Yeah, that is very scary to me as someone who believes in this superstitious stuff. It is a little freaky that
art makes life.
Art makes life.
The thing that feels sad about Itami's death to me is that it feels very antithetical to the way his movies go. Like, thinking about Supermarket Woman, it's about a small band of upstanding co-workers who come together and form a community to stand against the larger corporate antagonistic force. And to know that that's the opposite of what happened when Itami came up against the Yakuza is sad.
I was going to draw another link to Supermarket Woman and maybe Tampopo, which is that it sort of makes sense because from what I was reading, it sounds like Itami just gave no shits and just like said whatever he wanted.
Yeah.
He was not afraid of the Yakuza. And from what I could tell, it was because he was saying stuff like, oh yeah, they would never kill anyone, because he was kind of saying that they were pretty much like lily-livered organized crime, and they basically proved him wrong. But it kind of makes sense because you look at Supermarket Woman and Tampopo, he makes these characters that are extremely principled, who stick to their guns, speak up against people who seem much scarier and much more formidable than they are, and he doesn't care. And those are the heroes he loves. And he, I guess, was living his truth, which was the truth in his movies as well. It's sad, but it tracks, you know? It kind of tracks in terms of his work. It's sad because like, I was reading about how he started making movies really late. Like, he was 50 when he made his first feature, and he only made movies for like 10 to 15 years. He probably had so much more to come out with. And it's just kind of a shame.
I feel like he was just hitting his stride. Like, I think it is really a shame when directors are gone too early, when you feel like there was so much more that they would have been able to give to the world. Yeah. But rest in peace, Juzo Itami.
Yeah, rest in peace.
Yeah.
Let's move on to Supermarket Woman.
Which is what a glorious movie, and I think just an overall crowd pleaser. Supermarket Woman stars Juzo Itami's wife and regular leading lady Nobuko Miyamoto as a woman named Hanako.
Hanako is a widower who bumps into an old childhood friend named Goro at the opening of a local supermarket called Discount Demon. So Hanako knows a lot about supermarkets, and it turns out that Goro owns Honest Mart, a supermarket that is failing not only due to Discount Demon's opening, but also to bad management. Goro hires Hanako to help out with Honest Mart, and the film sees her trying to win the support of various factions, like the meat guys, the sashimi people, and the produce people within Honest Mart, to make changes within the store, in order to make the store the best supermarket in Japan, which is a phrase that is debated in one of my favorite scenes in the movie.
I think as a whole, the thing is a blast of like fun energy. You look at what Miyamoto is doing with the characters. She is constantly in motion, always excited. Like, when you talk about acts of service, this is like next level kind of thing. Like, even about the smallest thing, she's so excited to help and do good. And it's pretty much a kind of feel-good movie. There's very clear villains, there's very clear heroes, and it's very easy to root for those heroes. And it's just a very fun watch. Yeah, I think it's just a good time. It looks good. It's funny. It's weird. It's obsessed with supermarkets, and I kind of dig that. I like the part where she's introduced to the inner world of the supermarket, right? When she was first just a fan, and now she gets to see the inner mechanisms of how the market works, the heart of the supermarket being the assembly room in the back.
Right.
Like, that stuff is really fun. And if Tampopo is a film that plays on your love for food, specifically ramen and also other kinds of Japanese food, Supermarket Woman has to do the more taxing job of making you interested in supermarkets as a baseline, which is not a universal love for most people, I would say.
Yes.
Right? But I think it does a good job of making you love the supermarket. Not just
it's a good pro-capitalism movie.
Yeah. That's a really interesting point I want to get into.
Ooh, lots to unpack there.
Yeah, but it does a really good job of making you love how it works as an entity and also the people that work at the supermarket and the different groups of people. I like kind of listed down the different tribes almost in the supermarket. You have the cashiers, you have the meat side, you have the fish side, and then you have the produce side, I guess.
Yeah.
Like that's kind of like the general
and you have the cooked
breakdown.
food, the cooked food.
Yeah, the
like
cooked
the
food
cooks,
side as
the
well.
Chefs.
Yeah. And it really built a pretty big world within a very small world of the supermarket, which is really cool. And he does a great job of, Itami does a great job of realizing that in obviously his heightened world.
Yeah, he really stretches the bounds of what you can show and what you can shoot and what stories you can build within like one supermarket, because a lot of it just takes place in one supermarket or both of the supermarkets. And like if you think about the running time of the movie, it's over 2 hours. And I think not a lot of other directors can make just one location so interesting for that amount of time. And I think there's a lot of different strategies that he employs, a few being like how he crowds the frame every time, like with either with people or with produce and like production design and like constant like character / camera movement. Eli, what did you think?
I also really enjoyed it. It was a really excellent choice for the deep cut pick because I was thinking about the ways in which it compares and contrasts with Tampopo, particularly with Nobuko Miyamoto's role and her character in both movies. And I definitely want to dive into the differences and similarities between those two characters. Last episode, we talked about how the whole movie of Tampopo is a process sequence where she is going through the process of becoming a better ramen chef. And here, the whole movie is a process again. It sets a hazy goal of becoming the best supermarket in Japan. And then it specifies that goal, I think, really thoughtfully in that conversation that Wilson is describing. And it demonstrates what a good supermarket looks like. I think Itami is interested in virtue, by which I mean both moral virtue and the idea of virtue of when is something most essential to itself. When is ramen most essential, and what does that mean both in the product and in the act of creating ramen? And in the case of Supermarket Woman, what makes an essential, virtuous supermarket, and who are the people that make a virtuous supermarket? I think Itami really takes the concept very far and is very rigorous and thorough while also having so much fun. And then randomly, there's just like an incredible car chase at the end. Mad Max Freezer Road.
An even better chase within the supermarket, I would argue.
I agree. Yeah, that's an incredible. As a jump scare, it scared me.
I have some criticisms of the movie, and I think the freezer chase sequence is one of them because it feels so out of the world of the film. It feels very high budget for no real reason except to do something crazy, which I can get behind as well. But in terms of what the movie is trying to say, it feels like the wrong climax for the film.
Yeah, actually, I agree. And I think I wanted like 5 more minutes at the end of the movie to see sort of how the New Year's sale goes. I think part of the point is that, you know, you don't see how it turns out because that doesn't matter. It's about the fight and the stance that they're taking. Yes. But I agree with you, Ben, that the climax itself feels a little bit.
It could have been shifted a little.
Yeah, I don't think it should have been a set piece. I don't think it should have been a set piece. I think it should have been. It could still be part of it, but I feel this is, like you said, Eli, a film about the virtue of like, what is a virtuous supermarket, right? And so it's about the principle. It is not about who is going to be able to physically catch the bad guy.
Yeah.
Right. It should be about fighting the principle, right, between these two supermarkets. And I think it was missing a little bit of that.
Yeah.
It is in the fabric of the film, that discussion of the principle of what is a good supermarket, but the narrative doesn't go to a place of climax of that discussion. Right. It kind of already makes its point from early on in the first act or whatever.
Yes.
And then you just kind of follow it all the way through. So I think my main criticism of the film is about the narrative shape of it, where it never really crunches into its central question. Right.
Yeah.
What's a good supermarket? What does that mean? What does it mean to serve the people? It throws a lot of interesting questions into the mix, which I also want to get into.
But I think because Hanako has already such a strong idea, like I don't think she is like, that isn't question that she has in her mind. I think she already knows what constitutes a great supermarket. And it is about her trying to get all the different factions of the people working at the supermarket to be on the same page. And that is like the main quest of the movie, or her main goal of the movie. And I guess the final chase sequence being the meat people that she needs to get in line. It is never really a question for her.
I think my criticism is quite a light criticism, because if you kind of step back and look at Supermarket Woman as a narrative, the big difference is that here there's only really one story, right? Whereas Tampopo is made of vignettes and kind of little sketches.
Yeah.
But if you really look at Supermarket Woman is also actually just made of little sketches.
Yes.
Except they're all in the same world. And if you look at it from that standpoint, it kind of operates in the same way as Tampopo from a narrative construction view of it. And so it is like Tampopo not necessarily trying to tell a single cohesive plot or story, right? So in that sense, I kind of am able to forgive its looseness, because there's a lot of looseness going on in terms of like certain scenes. Like for me, one of those is the problem of the supermarket carts, which I felt like was set up but was not solved. So like that's kind of like what I'm talking about.
The payoff is that long take where she's running and she's gathering all the carts together, and there's like comedy in that, and then she goes to get the carts out of the guy's trunk, and she just starts
he has like 100, right?
More and more shopping bags.
I get it.
You can't take these home.
Fine, take them all.
I get that it's funny on its own, but I'm thinking from a very macro kind of view, which is why I still say it's a light criticism, right? To kind of think of it as
because in the moment it's still enjoyable.
Yeah,
I think you're both right. Because
you can't keep doing that, Eli. Take it.
Yeah, I can. Watch me, Ben.
Take a stand.
But seriously, I think that by asking the question, what is a virtuous supermarket? Because Itami cares so much about teams and chosen families, being a good supermarket means being a good team. And also, in terms of what kind of narrative it is, I think there is a bit more causality across the different threads than in Tampopo. Though, yes, there are sort of multiple balls juggling, and some of the scenes are one-offs, like the shopping cart scene. Nonetheless, I do still agree with what Ben's saying about the climax, because of the artisans that are working in the supermarket that Hanako has to deal with, there are certain gradations. So the produce pro is the easiest to get onto Hanako's side. And then the next most challenging guy is the fishmonger, and then the butcher, who's just a complete antagonist. So I both see how he fits into his role in terms of types of obstacles for Hanako. And it is also, I mean, just on the surface, it's a climax that takes place outside of the supermarket itself.
Right.
And I think that alone makes it feel a little bit off center. And also, the ways in which Hanako overcomes all the obstacles is through connecting to the pros. And in the climax, her agency is removed entirely and she's stuck in a freezer. I think one of the most touching scenes is when the fishmonger's fish tank of live fish is being removed. And he has a fit of anger and starts disassembling it himself and scares his coworkers. From there are kind of a number of jumping off points, like this whole argument that there's no room for artisans in a capitalist environment was a little bit uncomfortable for me. And then also we can talk about Nobuko Miyamoto's agency as Hanako. Does she exist for Goro? Does she exist for herself? In Tampopo, do the people who are helping her learn exist for her sake?
Right.
I'm very interested in how Itami is positioning his leading lady in both movies.
Yes. The Goro Hanako relationship is so interesting to me. Like, even from their first meeting in Discount Demon, the rival supermarket, where he's immediately already trying to come on to her. After
aggressively.
After like a really brief but really sincere moment where they both acknowledge the death of each other's spouses and I think that is a thread that continues, because like when she goes to visit his apartment, she pays respects to to the shrine that he has for his late wife, and then as she's doing that, he's also trying to come on to her. So I think Itami's trying to work through these ideas of like moving on from a deceased spouse and also like old horny people.
There's something sweet about old horny people.
I think there is as well. Eli and I were talking a little bit before we started recording, and I think Goro's forwardness was a little off-putting for him. Eli, sorry, I'm putting words in your mouth.
No, I agree. Specifically, Goro touching Hanako without her express permission. When that happened, I was like, oh man, I'm gonna have to hold two truths in my head for this movie.
I totally see where you're coming from, Eli. Like, it's a little off-putting and like a little strange. I guess I let myself forgive it mainly because there's an easiness to their chemistry in terms of the characters that they have.
Yes.
They're supposed to know each other, not intimately, but well enough that they can kind of jive with each other. And
from the get-go, it is established that the way that they know each other is that they were classmates in elementary school. And I think it is really funny because a lot of their dynamic does seem like two elementary school kids, like sort of like teasing each other and
dancing
with each other. And I think when I see Goro like coming on to Hanako, in my head, like a teenage boy coming on to a teenage girl and the girl being like, no, like swatting his hand away, like that's how I was seeing it. But like it is very true that there's a lot of unwanted advances coming from Goro in this movie that can be very off-putting.
That childishness in their relationship definitely seems like it's on purpose, but they are still older people. And it's both in the world and also made me feel a little weird. And I'm also thinking about how Hanako's character responds to Goro's advances. She sort of swats away his hand and calls him idiot and is a little playful and eventually agrees to attempt to sleep with him.
She can't stop laughing.
Yeah. The thing that I would like an answer to that I don't know is how much of that response that Hanako has to Goro's advances was come up with by Itami or by Miyamoto. Because I think there's a difference between a male director writing the character to respond that way and a lead actress bringing that to her character. I sort of don't know. I think it makes a difference.
I feel like I believe that Hanako is interested in Goro in a sense. I mean, she does say it herself, like why she doesn't actually want to sleep with him. But you can tell that there is some kind of chemistry there, and she is interested in him to a certain extent. I think, at least for me, the movie does a good job of not really saying what Goro is doing is right. He's just doing it as kind of part of his character that he is horny and interested in her, but it doesn't frame it as a good thing. And the fact that you're aligned with Hanako the whole time, you're kind of also, like mentally, I was also swatting him in a way, in a sense.
Yes.
And so I think at the very least, I can say that the film does not condone what Goro is doing. It doesn't condemn it, but at least doesn't condone it. I think a lot about old anime I used to watch when I was a teenager, and it feels very reminiscent of that kind of male-female relationships in anime.
Yes.
And I don't know whether it's something that's cultural, that not that they are okay with it, but it feels like one of those archetypes. I mean, a lot of anime is probably written and made by men as well. So
Yeah.
I think it kind of plays in those similar archetypes of horny dudes.
I like this point that you're with Hanako on those experiences and sort of looking down on Goro. And because she is the more active character through most of the movie, you just align with her more in general, even though you really enter the movie with Goro's perspective and his need of improving his supermarket. She becomes the more active character.
Yes.
And clearly she gets her own fulfillment from helping out in the supermarkets, not just serving Goro's needs. Until the ending, when I think part of the purpose of the climax becomes putting Goro up onto Hanako's level. He saves her life, including through disrobing her and having their bodies together and putting her in a bath to warm her up from being in a freezer. These feel like choices that put Goro's agency up next to Hanako's and also validates his advances in a sense, even though it is to save her life. This is another level where the climax doesn't feel quite right to me.
I think that's a fair point.
That is
I mean,
a really
I
fair point.
I think it makes sense. I'm going to go back to anime again. Like, I'm not saying it's correct. I'm saying that it plays in those same places. Like, this is the shit you'll see in, like,
Yeah.
male targeted, like, teen anime. Like, this kind of sexual humor,
Yeah.
especially.
Culturally, it is,
Yeah.
I think it is sort of like a common thing. And
Yeah.
that's not to say that we are letting it go, because we are talking about it.
Yeah.
But I think that is an explanation. And
Yeah, we can hold both things in mind.
yeah,
I think this is a good launching off point into our favorite topic, gender.
Yeah.
Because there's a conversation to be had about the gender lines in this film.
yes.
Right?
Yes.
You see it in so many of the big group scenes where the men and women are split into groups.
Mm-hmm.
And they really fall into groups of men and women quite cleanly most of the time. And I'm thinking a lot about the scene where Hanako goes to ask the Goro and as well as the rest of the so-called, it kind of looks like a board of directors kind of meeting where the butcher guy is there, fish guy is there, the manager is there, the corrupt manager is there. And she comes in with a group of women and is trying to ask them to stop selling repackaged produce.
Yeah.
And that's a very clearly gendered scene
Yes.
where the women are talked about as part-timers who are also housewives. And then you have the disinterested men who are controlling the supermarket.
Yeah.
And I found it very interesting as a sort of indictment of the problems with most supermarkets being that, at least in the world of Itami's film, and I guess in a sense he's trying to say in the world of Japan, the people who control the supermarket are men, but the people who use our customers of the supermarket are women, but the women are not in control of the thing that they are the so-called biggest stakeholders of, because they're the customers. And I found that to be a really interesting cultural comment, I guess, that is presented in a show don't tell kind of way.
Sharp observation. I'm thinking about how the women in that scene are standing as all the men are sitting.
Yeah.
And I'm also now thinking back on the customers that we see in the movie. Almost all of them are
Yes.
women.
Are women.
Except
yeah.
for an older man who Hanako helps with his baskets, and then a middle-aged man who is out by his car and stealing baskets.
When
So-
she starts taking them, and just like, fine, take them, and starts throwing like 10 out of his car.
Incredible use of off-screen space to hide a joke
Yeah.
and then reveal it.
That scene in the so-called boardroom is really interesting because it's really about how Hanako is a character that's helping this group of women, both the housewives as well as the women working in the supermarket, find their voice in shaping the supermarket for them.
Yeah.
And I think that's maybe one of the most powerful kind of elements of the film. You know, it is making a comment about gender, maybe gender that's specific to Japan, but it really works.
And it's carried on through the film, right? Because for Hanako, one of her biggest wins is when she sees the part-timers finally shopping at the store that they work at, and that I think is like one of her biggest celebrations that she has to Goro, and she repeats it to him many times, and he doesn't share in her elation, and she's just like, you just don't get it, like these are the customers that we need to be getting because they are housewives and they know best. And this whole core idea of like, you need to put the customer first always. Just think about their experience, and the most common customer of the supermarket being the housewife because society. And
Hey, I go to the supermarket. I just went there just now.
in
Where's
Itami's
my
society.
Hanako?
Yeah. Well, Ben, you have to be your own Hanako. You go talk to the
I want better
whatever
snacks
manager.
in the supermarket.
And I think it is a statement about gender, but also a statement about like the larger Japanese society and who runs what, but who is on the receiving end of these services, and I guess how ineffective it is. Because I do think he's not just making this movie because he wants to make this movie. I think there is this underbelly of a critique against these systems in place.
It feels like, you know how we talk in Tampopo about how some of the very short scenes are cultural comments in themselves, really, really concise.
Yeah.
Supermarket Woman feels like a really big version of that. And I'm reminded now of the scenes where the backroom deals are happening in that hostess bar or whatever, and you see how the women in those scenes are being presented and how they're in service of the men. And so there is definitely a larger commentary about how gender works in Japanese society for sure. When you really put everything together, you kind of see what the film is trying to say.
Yeah.
You know, it's not necessarily saying something specific, but it is putting all that in view. Right. And when you really think about it, and I think that's the thing that's so strong about these two films from Itami that I've seen. Like, he's so good at making a comment on the culture that he's presenting in a very, very almost subtle way. Even in his heightened universe, he is able to give you this message without just ramming it down your throat, and also having fun with it.
I think this is a good point to ask a little bit about the differences between Hanako and Tampopo as characters.
This is something that I wanted to talk about as well.
I already raised the question of, does Hanako exist to help Goro? Does she get her own satisfaction from the market? You know, it is narratively convenient that she pops up in his life to help him out with the market when she does, but it's not a convenience that sort of solves the problem of the movie. It is an inciting incident.
Right.
And maybe that makes it more easily swallowable. And also, Hanako clearly does find fulfillment and has most of the agency of the movie.
Definitely.
In Tampopo, in a sense, she's reactive in that she's being taught how to make ramen. But her needs are getting met by improving her own shop. And she has to do all the work of learning how to cook ramen. So she does have agency in Tampopo as well. It's interesting how on flip sides of sort of who is doing the teaching in the movie, Nobuko Miyamoto's character still has agency in both movies and is guiding the ship in different ways.
Yeah. I remember when I asked Wilson, is Supermarket Woman about Nobuko Miyamoto becoming the best supermarket woman ever? And then you laughed. And it's actually the reverse. Because in this one, she's the expert.
Because she already is
so fun.
the best supermarket woman. It is so great to see her on the other side and not the timid, eager to learn character, and more like, I am calling the shots. I know what to do, and trust me in my strategy, and we will succeed. I think Hanako is snappier than Tampopo. She has sass. I love that. And I think, like, it just from that, one of the very first scenes in the movie, after they meet at Discount Demon, Goro brings Hanako, who doesn't know that this is Goro's store. He brings her to his store, and he was just like, tell me about this store.
It's gonna fall.
And in one short scene, she's like, yeah, this is a shit show. But I think she still has agency, because he offers her a job that, like, is her decision whether or not to take. It sort of flips the trope on its head, where it's like, oh, the male boss, like, doesn't trust the woman who obviously knows a lot more than he does, like, her intuition, and fights back against her. And that would be in like, I guess, a common, like, Hollywood movie, that would be a central point of conflict, right? But in Supermarket Woman, it's just that he's just like, no, let's just have him fully trust in her capabilities and let her steer the ship. And what she does, and it's so great to see.
He's a smart businessman at the end of the day. Letting other people do his work. That's actually how business works.
Are we talking about capitalism?
Yes, that's the thematic territory I want to go into. But this is actually maybe the most time we've ever spent talking about thematic things in a film, I feel.
Thanks, Itami, for getting us to think about that.
Yay, theme.
I was specifically going to talk about this very central dichotomy they have of the artisan versus the assembly line, which I found really interesting. It doesn't really come up with a proper conclusion to the question it poses, I feel.
But I don't think there is. I think it's
I don't think there is
ongoing debate.
But it's such an interesting thing to be in, because I feel now we talk about artisanism as a cool thing because we live in a world of factory made objects and products. And to have this film basically say there is no more time for artisans because the assembly line is what the people need, is just such a strange stance that is weird to just hear. But yeah.
I would say that, yes, it has no place in the supermarket, but I think there is still mention of other places where artisanism is valued. Like, it is mostly comes up when she talks to the fishmonger, who prior to working at Honest Mart had his own fish shop that got sold, I think, and then Goro found him. And at the end of the movie, the fishmonger decides to go set up his own sashimi place or sushi place, not before training everyone else on how to cut sashimi. I do think that Itami is not disregarding artisans. He's just saying that in the world of the consumerist supermarket, there is no time for people to show off their talent.
In a way, it ties back to the conversation that Goro and Hanako have as they're looking out over the city. People want to live as well as they can on the little that they earn. So he's tying that directly into the idea that the artisan's price point and time consumption doesn't match with the livability and the wages of the consumer.
Same goes with, like, how she says the fanciest cuts of meat or the fanciest fish shouldn't be sold at the supermarket, because that's not where people go to buy the fanciest cuts of meat.
Now, if the market didn't exist and everything was artisans, then art could be affordable and livable. So
No, everything would be expensive. That's how it is. Like, I mean, factories make things cheap, but also when you make things cheap, then also everyone gets paid less. That's capitalism, right?
The argument that Itami is making is that artisans are overcharging and being wasteful of consumers. But the counter would be that mass production and corporations are undercutting artists. And Itami isn't necessarily saying the latter, but he is suggesting that there's a separate space where artisans can thrive.
I think there's an interesting link here between this and Tampopo, because we talked about how Tampopo was about basic ramen almost.
Right.
And here we have essentially essentials. He's talking about the supermarket being there for essentials. And I think just based on these two films, Itami definitely falls on the side of, I guess what you would say is the common man. And I think he is a little bit turning his nose up against fine goods and like the best stuff. And I think you get a lot of that when you think about Japanese culture and artisanism in Japan, and you look at apprenticeships in Japan. They have a lot of, if you look at any video from Great Big Story on Japan, it's always about the master craftsman finds one apprentice, he'll teach this one guy, and then this one guy will be holding this thing until he finds his next apprentice. And so I think Itami kind of doesn't like that kind of preciousness to
the uppityness of it.
Yeah, the uppityness and the preciousness of the craft. I think he kind of also is trying to say that the craft needs to be spread out, needs to be taught. So you kind of have that conclusion in Supermarket Woman, where the sashimi chef is teaching other people his craft. Yes, they're not maybe cutting the most impressive cuts of fish, but he's teaching the knife skills for sashimi. So it's an interesting stance that he is taking, because I think even now in contemporary now, we still valorize the expert a lot.
Yes.
And there's something interesting about a film that doesn't really celebrate the expert. It is celebrating the common man, common woman. It's interesting because I feel like you don't see that much cinema like this.
No, you don't.
Like even Tampopo was about Tampopo. Like it's difficult for a film to express the idea of the everybody. But that's what Itami's so good at. He's so good at groups of people. Like we talked about this with the cashiers, the housewives. These are all groups of people. The character is the community.
Yes. And so much of that is reflected. Sorry, we're gonna go a little away from the theme here.
Yes,
in
that's
the
a good
blocking,
segue.
in the blocking of this movie, and the way that he used crowds and extras, which is an insane amount of extras.
A lot of extras,
and they're just like sardines coming through the store. It's so beautiful and pleasing to the eye.
Good.
Just watching. I could name so many scenes. The most effective scene of this is the scene where they accidentally price down the eggs on their discounts, and the eggs should have been 88 yen, but they were 28 yen. And then you see like hundreds of people running into the store, grabbing egg after egg. And I think it is sort of supposed to be a loss for the team. In the context of the plot of the movie. So you have this sort of really emotional score as they just hand out carton after carton of eggs and being like one per person. And I think just how Itami always wants to fill a frame with as much people as possible, just to show like scale, even in an exaggerated way. It is so effective in driving a point home. And I think just using crowds all doing the same thing really like cements an idea or an image in your head. What else did you guys think about the crowd usage in this movie?
I have a few things to launch off from when we're talking about what I'm calling the egg catastrophe.
Yeah.
Because I think the egg catastrophe is such an interesting scene within the context of the film. Because watching Supermarket Woman, I was thinking a lot more about cinematography compared to Tampopo. And I was noticing a lot of scenes that were essentially just single shot
Long
scenes,
takes,
right?
yeah.
Long
Yeah.
takes of blocking movement. And he does a really good job with moving people around. There's a great example of this when they're interrogating the butcher near the end when they find out he's been stealing meat. The great thing about that scene is the use of the movement towards and away from the camera. So it's a wide shot, but then it goes from like wide shot of the butcher becomes a close up of the butcher, and there's movement laterally as well as axially, in the depth. And he does that very well with groups as well. The ballroom scene does this as well.
Yeah.
But the really interesting thing about A Catastrophe is that it uses a lot more cuts. And he does this with the more manic scenes. So you have this scene, you have shopping cart scene also does this, as well as the chase sequence. So he ramps up the cutting patterns when the scenes get more crazy. And I think that's such a good way of varying the rhythm of the film.
Yeah.
And I really love that watching Supermarket Woman. And also big difference in A Catastrophe is actually the use of a lot more telephoto close-up lenses on the random housewives that are coming in to buy the eggs. And that's a little strange because this film uses so many more wide-ish lenses.
Yes.
And then to suddenly give us close-ups of random people in a sense is quite jarring. And it really kind of seals the deal that this is a big deal and big like this is a big departure and a big catastrophe. And also that scene has great sound design with the random comments that come in from all the off-screen people commenting about the eggs. Taking a cue from Eli, listening more to the films.
Thank you, Skip
Yeah.
Livesay.
We love you, Skip.
A lot of great off-screen sound. Like there was the comments like, "This is not your first carton," or people complaining about supermarkets being the worst, blah 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 blah, and really creating not just visual chaos but also sonic chaos.
Yes. It's interesting that you guys are both referring to this as a loss, though. I mean, this is sort of getting back to theme a little bit, but it's maybe a loss on the profit side, but there is a definite pride and triumph in the way that the team comes together and handles the egg catastrophe.
Definitely, I think Hanako takes such pride in how she solves the problem, right? Obviously, there's the tension with the corrupt manager who's just like, fuck everyone.
Right.
We're just gonna say the sale is canceled. But then she's like, no, people trust our flyers. We must make do with what we have. We have to solve the problem in the most customer-friendly way. And I think the scene does such a good job of being both a rhythm change in the film and being a sort of mini set piece.
Yeah.
Also being a kind of exclamation mark on the principle of how Hanako views the supermarket.
Thinking about blocking in this scene and the use of crowds, Itami's also very purposeful about how he distinguishes people from the crowd through the telephoto lenses, as Ben is mentioning. And also, the supermarket team is often placed at a different height level than the standing crowd of shoppers. They're either above it, standing on carts to announce to the crowd and hand out egg cartons, or they're below it as the eggs are running out and they're transitioning into giving out flyers to promise a carton of eggs within 1 week. So Itami uses height very well to separate individuals from the crowd. Just randomly also, I'm thinking now about how there's one shot when Hanako pops into frame to talk to Goro from the bottom of the frame coming up. That's just such a rare way to cut into a frame on action, someone popping in from the bottom. It's such a clever little thing to throw in there.
Right.
Definitely, I think watching this one, like I really find so much joy in what's the name of the DP? Like I find so much joy in how this film looks and the way that it
Yonezo Maeda is the cinematographer.
Yonezo Maeda, who does such a great job with Itami of creating such interesting compositions using blocking to really energize the scenes
and camera movement as well. There's so much. It is such a propulsive movie in the way that, like, when the characters are running, like the camera is usually in front of them tracking backwards.
Did Wes Anderson steal his pans from this film? Because there were those 90-degree pans towards the aisles, and I was like, Did you watch this, Wes?
And a little bit.
Yeah, I just
Shoplifting.
Ooh. I just think it's such a fun playground to use. Just thinking about, like, I guess my local supermarket and like pushing a cart and how that sort of mirrors the dolly. That's also, I took inspiration for that for my senior thesis film.
Yeah.
But I just love how propulsive this movie feels. And I think that is also attributed to the heavier use of score this time around. In a lot of Itami's films, he loves using music, and I think the way that I think it's a hand drum that's used in this that heavily, where like when things are in panic mode or when they're moving a lot or they're just trying to get the store ready, it really just adds to it. Feels like a race. It feels like a sports movie. Like it feels like things need to be done and we need to save the day, and your investment into the characters and their drive is so important, and Itami using sound and visuals to get you into that mindset is really effective. Yeah.
Agreed.
Yeah. When is Supermarket Women coming to the MCU? That's my question.
What I'm realizing is it's one of those rare movies where, I mean, just like Tampopo, where it feels like so many choices are so well made and so specific. I think a lot about the color, the fact that Honest Mart is pink and the baskets are red. The uniforms of a lot of the staff are also red. And then you have the white, which also differentiates the different groups. And there's so many specific choices that it makes it feel like such a great movie to really dig into in terms of thinking about cinema as an auteurist medium, right? Like I said before in the podcast about how film can be the opposite, and now this is a film that kind of affirms the idea of the auteur because of how specific the choices can be and how not lazy it feels, because so many films are lazy. And I really love that about this.
I was thinking when we were talking about Itami's love for the everyday and common and his elevation of the mundane, about his genre or mode of filmmaking. It is popular in the sense that it is understandable and accessible. And I can't think of anyone who wouldn't really enjoy these two movies. That feels fitting with the themes of both movies. But as Ben is noting, there's such a high level of craft and care, and also what Wilson told us about last week with the ways in which Itami assembles his team and cares about his team members. It feels like a perfect blend of the goodness of what cinema can be and how it can reach people, while still being a highly careful and craft-forward art form.
I think we look back into the kind of conversation we had about artisanism and assembly line making. It kind of makes sense because essentially what he's saying in both films is that there is craft to the everyday that is at the same level as what the artisans are doing. He is finding craft in the running of a supermarket that provides the essentials.
Yes.
And he is saying that this is the same level as the craft of a expert sashimi slicer or a expert butcher. Like he's elevating the mundane, like you said, Eli, to the same level as those artisans. And maybe that makes sense and kind of gives you more clarity into Itami's stance on artisanism and the everyday.
Well, the customer is always right, and so should the listener be. Fuck. Thank you for listening to this episode of Deep Cut. Please rate and review because that helps us keep making the show. Be sure to subscribe to us where you listen to podcasts so you'll know when our next episode drops. You can also give us a follow on Twitter and Instagram at DeepCutPod. That is where we'll be announcing our next director that we're going to cover. Woo! Join us to talk about movies on our Discord server, to which you'll find a link in the description. Thank you to Justina Yam for her beautiful artwork. I'm Wilson.
I'm Ben.
I'm Eli.
Take care, and we're looking forward to talking about more movies with you next time.